I should never have answered her question. But I did, and the truth that came out of my mouth that night was something I hadn't said out loud in 4 years. Not to my friends, not to the people in town, not even to the woman buried under the oak tree on the hill. Especially not to her. My name is Luke Harris. I'm 36 years old, and for the last 4 years, I've been living like a man who forgot how to belong to the world. I run a small horse ranch just outside of Boulder, Colorado. It's quiet out here. The kind of quiet where the wind moves through the grass like it has secrets to tell, and the stars look close enough to touch if you stand still long enough. People in town think they know me. To them, I'm the guy who fixes broken fences without complaining. The guy who calms nervous horses with a low voice and steady hands. The guy who always leaves the bar early and never brings anyone home. What they don't know is that most nights, I talk to a grave. Her name was Hannah, my wife, and even now, 4 years after cancer took her from this world, there are nights when I still sleep on one side of the bed, because the other side feels like it belongs to her. So when my neighbor Olivia asked me that question at the 4th of July barbecue, the one that made the whole table go silent, I should have laughed. A normal man would have laughed, but Olivia tilted her head, studying me like I was some kind of puzzle she couldn't solve. And she said, loud enough for half the town to hear, "Luke, you seem like you'd be good in bed. Are you married?" And without thinking, I told her the truth. "No, ma'am," I said quietly. "I'm still waiting for her." And the moment those words left my mouth, I saw something change in Olivia's eyes, something that made me realize the night wasn't going to end the way I thought it would, because she didn't look embarrassed anymore. She looked curious, and that scared me more than anything. Olivia didn't laugh when I said it. Most people would have. A joke, an awkward comment, something to break the tension that had just fallen over the picnic table like a heavy blanket. But Olivia just watched me, really watched me. Her eyes didn't move away from mine, even when the rest of the table started shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Mike coughed into his beer. One of the older women whispered something under her breath. But Olivia didn't look at them. She looked at me. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like someone was trying to see past the quiet. "Man, everyone in town thought they knew. Waiting for her?" She asked softly, not mocking, not teasing, just trying to understand. I rubbed the back of my neck and looked down at the paper plate in front of me, like it might have answers written on it. "It's complicated," I said. She tilted her head a little. Most honest things are. Something about the way she said that made my chest tighten, because she didn't sound like someone making conversation. She sounded like someone who knew what complicated really meant. The sky above the fairgrounds was turning deep purple now. Kids were running past the tables with sparklers, leaving bright streaks of light in the air. Somewhere behind us, the first firework shot into the sky with a sharp whistle. The explosion painted Olivia's face gold for half a second, and in that flash of light I noticed something I hadn't before. She wasn't just curious. She looked nervous, like she had asked the question on impulse and now wasn't sure what she'd uncovered. "I'm sorry if that was too personal," she said quickly. "You don't have to explain anything to me." I nodded slowly. "That's good," I said, "because I'm not sure I know how." For a moment we just sat there listening to the fireworks popping in the distance. Then Olivia took a slow sip of her beer and glanced back at me, and the small smile that touched her lips wasn't flirtatious. It was thoughtful. "Still," she said quietly, "I think it's kind of beautiful. Waiting for someone like that." I almost told her the truth right then, that it wasn't beautiful, that it was lonely as hell. But before I could say anything else, Olivia leaned a little closer across the table and asked a question that caught me completely off guard. "So tell me something, Luke." Her voice dropped just enough that only I could hear it. "Are you waiting because you loved her? Or because you're afraid to love anyone else?" For a second, I didn't answer. Not because I didn't hear the question, but because it hit something inside my chest that I'd been carefully avoiding for 4 years. The fireworks cracked above the fairgrounds, bright bursts of red and gold lighting up the sky. People clapped. Kids cheered, but all I could hear was Olivia's quiet voice repeating in my head. "Are you waiting because you loved her? Or because you're afraid to love anyone else?" I let out a slow breath and stared at the condensation sliding down my beer bottle. "No one's ever asked me that before," I admitted. Olivia gave a small shrug. "Most people are polite enough not to." That made me laugh under my breath. It surprised both of us, because it was the first real laugh I'd had all night. "Polite," I said. "That's not exactly the word people use to describe you around town." She smiled at that, the kind of smile that had a little edge to it. I noticed. Another firework exploded overhead. The light caught her face again, and this time I saw something softer in her expression. Not curiosity, something closer to understanding. "You don't have to answer if it hurts," she said quietly. "I just wondered." I turned my head toward the open field, where families were standing, shoulder to shoulder watching the show. Couples leaned against each other. A man lifted his little girl onto his shoulders so she could see better, and suddenly that familiar ache spread through my chest again, the one that never really left. "I loved her," I said finally. The words felt heavier than they should have. Olivia didn't speak. She just waited. "I still do," I added. Another long pause stretched between us. Then Olivia nodded slowly like that answer made sense to her. But when she looked back at me, something in her eyes had changed again. "Okay," she said softly. "I believe you." She took another sip of her beer, then set the bottle down. "But that wasn't really my question, Luke." I frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Her gaze held mine steadily now. The fireworks lit the sky again behind her, turning her eyes bright for a second. "I asked if you're waiting because you loved her," she said. Her voice was gentle. "But what I'm really trying to figure out," she leaned back slightly in her chair, "is whether you're still alive." And for some reason, that question hurt a lot more than the first one. I didn't answer her right away, because the truth was, I didn't know. Was I still alive? I woke up every morning. I fed the horses. I fixed fences. I paid bills. I showed up where people expected me to be. From the outside, it probably looked like a life, but inside, some days it felt more like I was just maintaining a memory. Olivia watched me carefully while that silence stretched between us. Not pushing, just waiting. Finally, I cleared my throat. "That's a strange question to ask a man at a barbecue," I said. She smiled a little. "That's a strange answer to give a woman who asked if you're good in bed." That caught me off guard enough that I laughed again, a real laugh this time. A few people at the table glanced over like they'd just seen a ghost themselves. Apparently, Luke Harris laughing wasn't something the town saw very often. Olivia noticed that too. Her smile softened. "See," she said quietly. "You do it sometimes." "Do what?" "Come back." The words landed somewhere deep in my chest. Before I could figure out how to respond, another firework cracked overhead. The sky burst into bright silver sparks. The light reflected in Olivia's eyes as she watched it for a second. Then she looked back at me. "Can I tell you something weird?" she asked. "Depends how weird." She hesitated. Not long. Just long enough that I could see she was deciding whether to say it. "I've been watching you," she admitted. That should have sounded creepy, but it didn't. It sounded honest. "From my kitchen window," she added quickly. "I can see part of your ranch." I rubbed the back of my neck. "That explains a lot." She raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" "Like why you suddenly know how to start that old tractor," I said. Her cheeks flushed. "Okay, maybe I watched you fix it once." I shook my head, smiling despite myself. But then her expression grew serious again. "I've watched you with those horses," she said quietly. "The way you talk to them when they're scared." She held my eyes. "You're patient with them." Another pause. "But with people." Her voice softened. "You disappear." I swallowed slowly, because she wasn't wrong. "I'm not very good with people," I admitted. She tilted her head slightly. "No," she said. "I think you're too good with them, oh." I frowned. "That doesn't make sense." "It does," she said gently. "You're careful." Her gaze flicked briefly to the chain around my neck, where my wedding ring hung beneath my shirt. Then back to my eyes. "You're just afraid that if you let someone close again." Her voice dropped almost to a whisper. "You might lose them too." And suddenly the fireworks didn't seem nearly as loud as my heartbeat. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Not because Olivia had said anything cruel, but because she had said something true, and truth has a way of cutting deeper than any insult. I looked down at the table, turning the cold beer bottle slowly between my hands. "You're very observant," I muttered. Olivia shrugged lightly. "When you move to a new town alone," she said, "you notice people." That word lingered. Alone. It sounded heavier coming from her than it had when I used it for myself. "You seem pretty comfortable here," I said. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Comfortable and settled are two different things. Another firework exploded above us. Bright blue sparks rained across the sky. And for a second the whole fairground glowed. In that light I noticed something I hadn't before. Olivia's hands were trembling slightly around her beer bottle. "You okay?" I asked quietly. She nodded too quickly. "Yeah." Then she took a breath and looked at me again. "You know what's funny?" she said. "What?" When I asked that question earlier, she paused, rubbing her thumb along the edge of the label on her bottle. I wasn't actually talking about sex. I raised an eyebrow. You have a strange way of starting conversations. She laughed softly. I know. Then her voice turned thoughtful again. I meant the way you move through the world. That confused me. What does that have to do with being good in bed? Her eyes met mine, because the way she looked at me now felt more serious than playful. It means being present, she said. Not controlling someone. Not disappearing. Just being there. Her fingers tapped lightly against the table. The way you are with those horses? Something shifted uncomfortably in my chest. People aren't horses, I said. No, she agreed. They're harder. Another pause settled between us. Then Olivia leaned forward slightly. Luke, can I ask you something else? You already are. Her lips twitched. Fair. She hesitated again, this time longer. Then she said quietly, if your wife were sitting here right now. Her eyes held mine steadily. Do you think she'd want you to keep living like this? The question hit harder than any punch I'd taken in my life. I stared at her, and for the first time all night, I didn't have an answer. For a long moment, I couldn't look at her, because the answer to Olivia's question had been sitting inside me for years. I had just never been brave enough to say it out loud. The fireworks were getting louder now, echoing across the fairgrounds. But everything around our end of the table felt strangely quiet. I don't know, I said finally. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was the closest thing I could manage. Olivia studied my face like she was reading something written between the lines. Then she nodded slowly. That's honest, at least. I rubbed my thumb across the neck of the beer bottle. Hannah made me promise something before she died, I admitted. Olivia's posture changed immediately. She didn't interrupt, didn't rush me. She just listened. The way a person listens when they understand the weight of what's coming next. She made me promise I wouldn't shut my life down after she was gone, I said quietly. The words felt strange in the open air, like they had been locked in a room too long. She said grief can turn into a prison if you let it. Olivia's eyes softened. That sounds like a smart woman. She was. The simple sentence caught in my throat more than I expected. I swallowed and looked out toward the dark field beyond the tables. I told her I would try, I continued. That I'd fall in love again one day. Another firework burst high above us, scattering bright red sparks across the sky. But Olivia's voice came softly through the noise. And did you try? I shook my head once. Not really. She waited, and that quiet patience made the confession come easier. I kept waiting for it to stop hurting, I said. For the moment when it wouldn't feel like betrayal. My voice dropped lower, but that moment never came. Olivia exhaled slowly. Luke! She reached across the table then, just for a second. Her fingers brushed the back of my hand. Not dramatic, not romantic, just human. You know something? She said gently. What? You might be misunderstanding that promise. I frowned slightly. How? Her eyes held mine. Because loving someone again isn't a betrayal, she said. It might actually be the only way to keep the promise you made. Her fingers pulled back, but the warmth from that brief touch lingered longer than it should have. And suddenly, for the first time in 4 years, I realized something dangerous. Talking to Olivia didn't feel like talking to the dead. It felt like talking to someone who might actually pull me back to life. And that terrified me, because if she could do that, then I might lose her someday too. That realization sat in my chest like a stone. Because the moment you start caring about someone, you also start imagining the moment you might lose them. And I had already buried the love of my life once. I wasn't sure I could survive doing it again. So the safest thing to do with Olivia, the smart thing, would have been to stand up, thank her for the conversation, and walk away before things got complicated. But I didn't. Instead, I stayed right there at that picnic table while the fireworks exploded over the fairgrounds, and every few minutes Olivia's eyes drifted back to mine. Not in a flirtatious way, in a curious one, like she was studying the man behind the silence. You're thinking too hard, she said suddenly. I blinked. Am I that obvious? She smiled. A little. Then she leaned her elbows on the table again, lowering her voice so only I could hear. Let me guess. I sighed quietly. This should be interesting. You're wondering if talking to me is a mistake. That made me freeze, because she had said it so casually, like it wasn't even a question. It was a fact. I gave a small huff of breath. You do that a lot? Do what? Climb inside people's heads. She shrugged. Only when they leave the door wide open. I shook my head slightly. You don't make things easy, do you? No, she said. But easy is usually boring. Another firework streaked across the sky above us. lighting up her face for a split second. And I noticed something then, something that made my chest tighten. She wasn't just curious about me. She looked nervous, like she had already stepped further into this conversation than she meant to. "Can I tell you something honest?" she asked. "You been doing that all night?" Her smile faded a little. "When I moved here 8 months ago," she said quietly, "you were the first person I noticed." That surprised me. "Why?" She looked down at the table for a second before answering. "Because you looked like someone who understood what it feels like to survive something." The way she said it made my stomach tighten. "You mean grief?" She shook her head slowly. "No." Her eyes lifted back to mine. "I mean the kind of pain that changes who you are." Then she added softly, "And the kind that makes you afraid to let anyone see who you used to be." Something about that sentence felt too personal, like there was a story behind it, one she hadn't told me yet, and the quiet in her voice made me realize something. Olivia wasn't just trying to understand me, and she was trying to decide whether it was safe to let me understand her. The siren came out of nowhere. At first it was just a distant wail cutting through the night air, barely noticeable over the echo of the gunshot still ringing in my ears. Then it got louder, closer. Ryan heard it too. His head snapped toward the road beyond the cemetery fence. And for the first time since he arrived, something in his expression cracked. Not fear exactly, but calculation. "Men like Ryan don't panic. They adjust." "You called the cops?" He spat toward Olivia. Her hands were still shaking around the gun she'd picked up from the ground. "I didn't," she said, voice unsteady. I believed her, but the sound of gravel crunching at the bottom of the hill said someone had definitely called them. Ryan's eyes flicked back to me. "You think this ends well for you?" he said quietly. Blood dripped from the corner of my lip where his elbow had caught my jaw. I wiped it away with the back of my hand. "I think it ends with you leaving," I said. The siren cut off suddenly. Headlights swept through the trees and across the iron fence like a pair of searching eyes. Ryan's shoulders stiffened. For half a second I thought he might run. Instead he laughed, a cold, short sound. "Good," he said. "Let's see what your small-town sheriff thinks about a jealous widower attacking a man with a legal firearm." Olivia stepped closer behind me. I could feel her presence there, close enough that the back of my arm brushed hers. "I told you," she said loudly now, voice shaking but determined. "I'm not going with you." Ryan didn't even look at her. His attention stayed locked on me. "That's not her decision to make," he said calmly. Something inside my chest hardened when he said that, because I had heard that tone before. The tone of a man who believed the world existed to obey him. Then the patrol truck door slammed. Boots hit gravel. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness. "Everybody freeze!" A voice shouted from the bottom of the hill. "Sheriff the Dale Coopero." Ryan slowly raised his hands, turning just enough that the moonlight showed his smile again. But it was thinner now, less confident. "Sheriff," he called smoothly. "Thank God you're here." The word sounded polite, grateful even, but something in my gut told me this wasn't over yet, because the way Ryan glanced back at Olivia looked less like surrender and more like a promise. Sheriff Cooper reached us in less than 10 seconds. But those 10 seconds felt longer than the entire fight. His flashlight beam moved quickly over the scene, me breathing hard, Ryan standing with his hands raised, Olivia shaking beside Hannah's grave, and the gun lying on the ground between us. "All right," Dale said calmly. "Someone want to tell me why my peaceful little cemetery sounds like a war zone tonight?" Ryan spoke first. "Of course he did. That man attacked me," he said smoothly, nodding toward me. His voice had completely changed again. Polished, controlled, like a man used to explaining things his way. "I came here to talk to my fiancée," he continued. "She's been going through a difficult emotional episode and ran away from home." Olivia made a sound of disbelief behind me. "I did not—" Dale raised one hand gently. "Miss Olivia," he said, "I'll hear you in a second." Then he looked at Ryan. "Your fiancé, huh?" Ryan nodded confidently. "Yes, sir." Dale's flashlight shifted toward Olivia. "Ma'am, you want to confirm that?" Olivia stepped out from behind me. Her voice was still shaking, but something else had appeared underneath it now. Resolve. "No," she said. "I absolutely do not." Ryan let out a small sigh, like a patient man dealing with a stubborn child. "She's upset," he said. "She's been unstable since her aunt passed away." Dale looked back at him. Then something interesting happened. The sheriff's mouth twitched slightly. "Funny thing about that," he said. Ryan frowned. "What do you mean?" Dale reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I got a notice from Dallas County about 3 months ago," he said. "Temporary protective order. Ryan's smile disappeared. Dale continued calmly. Against a man named Ryan Whitaker. Olivia's shoulders dropped slightly, like she'd been holding her breath for weeks. Ryan stared at the sheriff. That's ridiculous, he said. She withdrew that. Nope, Dale replied. Still active. The flashlight beam dropped briefly to the gun on the ground. And you crossing 2 states to track her down while carrying a firearm? He added. Ryan didn't respond. Not right away. For the first time all night. He looked unsure. The deputy who had arrived with the sheriff stepped forward. Sir, he said. Turn around for me. Ryan's jaw tightened. You can't be serious. Oh, I'm very serious, Dale said calmly. The metal cuffs clicked around Ryan's wrists. And as the deputy led him toward the patrol truck, Ryan twisted his head back toward us. His eyes locked on Olivia, then on me. You think this is over? He said quietly. His voice had lost the smooth charm now. What remained was something colder. People like you don't win these games. The truck door slammed before either of us could answer, and suddenly, the graveyard was quiet again, except for Olivia's uneven breathing beside me, and the strange realization forming slowly in my chest. Tonight had almost ended very differently. After the patrol truck disappeared down the hill, the cemetery went quiet again, the kind of quiet that settles slowly after chaos. The wind moved softly through the oak tree above Hannah's grave. Somewhere far away a coyote called, and beside me Olivia was still shaking, not violently anymore. Just the small tremble that comes after fear finally lets go. You okay? I asked gently. She nodded, wiping the corner of her eyes with the sleeve of her hoodie. Yeah. Then she let out a shaky breath. I think I just realized something. What's that? She looked at Hannah's headstone for a moment, then back at me. I spent 2 years believing I couldn't stand up to him, she said quietly. But tonight, her voice softened. I did. You did, I agreed. She smiled a little, a tired smile but real. And you stood in front of me, she added. I shrugged slightly. Seemed like the right place to stand. For a moment neither of us spoke. The stars above the cemetery were bright now. Brighter than the fireworks had been earlier. Olivia stepped a little closer, her hands tucked inside the sleeves of her hoodie. Luke, she said. Yeah? Earlier tonight. You told everyone you were still waiting for your wife. I nodded slowly. I remember. Her voice softened. But when you stood in front of me back there, she hesitated. You didn't look like a man who was waiting anymore. That landed somewhere deep in my chest. I turned slightly toward Hannah's grave. The flowers I'd left earlier rested quietly at the base of the stone. Love is a promise you keep, even when it hurts. For 4 years I thought that promise meant staying here, holding on, not moving forward, but standing in the cool night air beside Olivia. I realized something Hannah had probably known all along. Keeping the promise didn't mean living with ghosts. It meant unlearning how to live again. I took a slow breath, then looked back at Olivia. No, I said softly. I'm not waiting anymore. Her eyes searched my face carefully. Does that mean... I smiled a little. It means I'm trying. She nodded. That seemed to be enough. Then she slipped her hand into mine. Warm, steady. Good, she said quietly. Because I think I'd like to see what the living version of you looks like. And for the first time in 4 years, walking down that hill beside her, I didn't feel like a man leaving the cemetery. I felt like a man finally walking on back toward life.